Hello, everyone. Welcome to Family Matters. We're so excited to have you join us today. For this episode, we're joined by Dr. William Mansbach, the founder and CEO of Mansbach Health Tools, which supports the BCAT Research Center. He's the CEO and president of Counterpoint Health Services, which is an interprofessional behavioral healthcare company specializing in geriatrics and dementia care. Welcome, Dr. Mansbach.
Thank you, Abby. Nice to be with you again.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and jump right in. Today, our topic is about meditation and integrating meditation into the daily routine of older adults with cognitive impairment. So before we get into that, can you just explain a little bit more about your role at Counterpoint Health Services and the Brain Health and Psychiatry Center?
Oh, sure. So I'm the CEO, as you mentioned, of Counterpoint Health Services. Yes, we specialize in geriatrics, mostly as it pertains to dementia and behavioral health issues. So we have a lot of experience taking care of people with cognitive impairment, sort of the full range of all that. We take care of people in nursing homes, in senior living communities, and in the broader community. I think you also asked about the Brain Health and Psychiatry Center. So that is a little bit different in that we focus, as you wouldn't be surprised, on brain health, mostly for people who are living in the community. They're not in a nursing home, they're not in senior living, and they're concerned about changes that they've noticed or their family have noticed in their cognition and their function. So they come to us because they want a comprehensive evaluation first, and then they want, if appropriate, whatever the necessary treatments or interventions are. We do a lot of cognitive coaching at the Brain Health and Psychiatry Center, which is really trying to help people improve their cognition as they age in place.
Great. Sounds like there's a lot to be said in all of that.
There
Um,
is.
As I mentioned, we're going to talk about meditation, which is also referred to as centered breathing. Is there a difference between the two, and can they be used interchangeably?
That's a good question. In the United States, I think people got familiar with the idea of meditation probably going back to the 1950s and 60s with transcendental meditation. And in the minds of many, that really was meditation. Of course, we know over the decades, there are many different forms of meditation. All of them pretty much involve centered breathing, starting with the breath, often ending with the breath. So meditation can mean many different things, but breathing is a part of it. Centered breathing is a more recent term. We use that a lot at Counterpoint and certainly at the BCAT Research Center. I think the terms are really interchangeable. Abby, you can use either one. When you talk about centered breathing or meditation, you know you're focusing on breath, concentration in the here and now, and there are many different types and styles.
That's very helpful. Thank you. So then when we're talking about meditation and centered breathing, frequently we hear about it for the typical person doing centered breathing or meditation. However, this idea that it's actually beneficial for those with a cognitive impairment seems to be relatively new. I was wondering if you could just expand a little bit about that.
Well, you are right. It is relatively new and it's almost counterintuitive. One could say, well, wait, if you have cognitive impairment and all the things that go with that, poor memory, poor concentration, distractibility, how do you do meditation? It seems like there's a certain amount of mindfulness that would require a certain amount of sustained cognitive ability. And that's both true and not true. So what we've discovered over the past, let's say 5 years, is that for those who have mild cognitive impairment, for those who have early to moderate stages of Alzheimer's disease and related dementia, that there's a pretty strong and growing research literature supporting the idea that meditation can be done by these individuals, that it can be helpful in a number of ways that I hope we get to talk about. But often it needs to be assisted by someone else. And that someone else can be a person who's right there with them, or it actually can be either a video or the actual meditative sort of technique itself.
Okay, that's helpful to hear too. So it can be beneficial for those with a cognitive impairment, even
Mhm.
as their memory and their attention declines, due to that disease process or with dementia or just a general cognitive impairment. What kind of positive impacts does meditation or centered breathing have on those individuals with the cognitive impairment?
So let me answer sort of part B of your first question, and then I'll answer actual benefits. If you think about it, centered breathing or meditation requires one to be in the moment, not dependent on the past or focusing with anxiety on the future. But actually, that's what happens with cognitive impairment. Person often is in a moment, unable to process what's going to happen next. The past could be elusive in some ways. So, on one level, if you can get a person to stay in the moment, and you do that through breathing, you can see how, with some cognitive impairment, a person could actually benefit. Now, what does benefit really mean? Well, the interest in the science of meditation or centered breathing for people with cognitive impairment was focused primarily on how do you reduce those dementia-related behaviors of agitation, all right? So what we call the BPSDs, the behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia, agitation through let's say verbal aggression or physical aggression or wandering or disrobing, any number of different symptoms that many family members are unfortunately quite familiar with in a loved one. So the idea was, is it the case? Can you establish that a certain type of center breathing might reduce those symptoms, either in terms of severity or in frequency, and especially for people who have the sundowning syndrome or late day confusion, those who tend to have more behavioral problems in the late afternoon and early evening. So turns out that if the style of meditation or center breathing is calibrated correctly, and we can talk about what that should look like, that you can meaningfully show reductions. And I think it's because of the neurophysiology of the brain, Abby, in that you're engaging the calming part of the brain, what's called the parasympathetic nervous system. So that lowers cortisol and stress hormones, tends to increase the release of more happy, calming neurotransmissions like serotonin. And so centered breathing is a way of getting at that.
So if you're able to engage this person in centered breathing, then not only are they going to have the normal, well-known, positive impacts of, just feeling better and putting you in a good mood and making you more calm, it also is going to have a positive interaction with any kind of reduction in behaviors that could occur. So that sounds like a win-win to me.
What's remarkable is, I mean, what we looked at our center was if you do centered breathing, let's say in the morning routinely, and really we're talking about 10, 15, 20 minutes once or twice. And you do that for individuals who tend to get agitated later on in the day. What we're finding is that the frequency and the severity of that agitation is significantly reduced. It's almost as if, Abby, you're trying to build kind of a calming reserve that a person can tap into. So they're less likely to become agitated by things going on either internally or externally in the environment around them.
Sure, that makes sense. So I could relate it to just as a being a human being adult. If I know I'm going into a stressful situation, I could prepare myself by maybe doing some centered breathing before that situation. For the individual with a cognitive impairment, we would want them to build that kind of calming reserve, just as part of the day.
Right. So this is a fundamental difference. So what you can do is you can do your centered breathing by any one of a zillion meditation apps that are out there. It can be no app at all. You can just on your own do breathing, 444, 424, all kinds of different breathing. that we know is going to reduce stress, and it's unquestionably helpful for lowering stress. But you have agency. You have the ability to do that on your own. And so you could do your own breathing. You could listen to an app that may be guided, or maybe you listen to calming music, or whatever, or nature sounds, all those kinds of things. But if you had cognitive impairment, you don't have agency in the same ways. You can't choose it. You can't organize it. And not only that, the more cognitively impaired a person is, the more you need support, not just in what you hear, let's say a guided imagery, but you need to use another sense. And it's usually going to be a visual sense. So in cognitive impairment, to do centered breathing, you'd want a guided video that is both auditory, something that you hear, and visual. And it's the visual part that's so critical, because for most people with, let's say, Alzheimer's disease, early Alzheimer's disease, it's a good example, the visual system is not affected by that, but the auditory system can be. We use the term anchoring or tethering, that a meditative or centered breathing video that has a visual component that's engaging tethers the person so that they can focus and they can concentrate and listen to the script, like the voiceover. And the voiceover has to be very special too.
That's really helpful. Okay, thank you. So, can individuals, even with severe cognitive impairments, benefit from meditation? I know you mentioned those with MCI or even a mild, but what about those that are more of a later stage of dementia or just more severe impairments?
I think all people can benefit from deep breathing. Breathing's natural. In fact, we're not thinking about our breathing right now. It's part of our involuntary system. In dementia, that doesn't change. As long as we're alive, we are breathing. That said, though, we have to be directive. So I would say that people with mild to moderate stage dementia, those who, let's say, can sustain attention for 5 to 10 minutes, could benefit from the videos that we talked about, visual, auditory, the kind of standard ones that we're now using for people who have cognitive impairment. For those who have truly advanced dementia, who are unable to focus for even 5 minutes, a little bit of breathing is fine. So that center breathing is fine, but the video part of it is probably not going to be very effective, because a person cannot sustain enough what we call working memory or attention in order to benefit.
So you mentioned, that just a person like you or I could, go on and do any kind of breathing, listening to nature sounds, etc. There's a ton of meditation apps out there. There's a ton of different programs, that you could participate in. But for someone with a cognitive impairment, and you mentioned the auditory and the visual component. So how would you recommend the older adult, with cognitive impairment get started, taking into consideration the visual and the auditory perspectives?
Well, the best to get started would be doing it with someone else who can guide you. That's very immediate, right in front of you, but that's not always practical. And of course, that would assume that that other person knows how to do these things and knows how to do meditation, and that's not always guaranteed. So what we wanted to do, and we did this with the 15 for Me program, is that we wanted to create evidence-based videos that a person could get started, could do without any experience in centered breathing or in meditation, or with much experience in meditation. It wouldn't really matter, where you could have a voiceover script that is chunked in a way that can be processed by someone who has dementia, where the content of the speech and the content of what the visual part is would be very sensory oriented, things that you hear, things that you see, things that you smell, things that you taste, things that you touch, and that sort of thing. If you don't have access to 15 for Me, then you could, again, on behalf of a loved one with dementia or cognitive impairment, you can search for meditations, but do find meditation videos that have a visual and an auditory component. And just try it out. Do 5 minutes at a time. And don't just turn it on and leave. Make sure that a person's engaged in some ways, or do it with them. That might be a very effective method to get started.
Okay, great. So with that 15 for Me app, is that something that any ad adult with a cognitive impairment could just start working on right away? Or do they, I'm just thinking of the older adult with a cognitive impairment that doesn't have any previous knowledge of centered breathing or
Sure.
meditation. So how are they able to just, start participating, or do they need to have a previous knowledge?
I don't think they have to have a previous knowledge. I think with more advancing dementia or more advancing cognitive impairment, you might need a guide with you to get you started. The thing about apps is that they're digitized in some ways. They're on a device. So if a person is, let's say, insecure, technology insecure in some ways, or unable to really manipulate even a phone, a smartphone, having somebody set it up for them is probably a good thing. And I like to think about center breathing with someone with dementia. It's an opportunity to meaningfully engage a loved one, doing something together. I think those things are truly valuable. And as they say in meditation, you're truly in the moment. So that can be a very special time for you and for the loved one who has cognitive impairment.
Absolutely, I agree. Um, any last words of advice on this topic? We just really have room or time for one more question. So just want to see if you have any
Well,
last pieces of advice.
just this, Abby, there are many people who may think that meditation is sort of fluff or not amenable to hard scientific evidence, but it isn't that way. Meditation is a very helpful tool or resource that anyone can use, or almost anyone, even those who have fairly significant cognitive impairment. And I think that whereas medications can be very effective at times, you're not swallowing a pill with any side effects or any, sort of down chain problem when doing a non-pharmacologic intervention. Try meditation. I think it's something that can benefit most people. And again, breathing is very natural. Let's take advantage of it.
Thank you. Dr. Mansbach, thank you so much for taking the time to share with our families all of your knowledge and expertise, especially on this great topic about meditation and centered breathing. I'm sure that everyone listening in is valuing your expertise. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and stay tuned for our next Family Matters episode.
Thanks, Abby.